Hi, I'm Dennis Wade, and we're here at Storage Visions 2013 in Las Vegas, which precedes the CES show, which I think is the largest worldwide consumer electronics show in the country. And I have with me Steven Cohen right now, and Steven is one of our participants this morning. He's got a very large 30-40 year background in the entertainment industry, working with entertainment data, speeding up entertainment data, and looking at what they need as an industry for the future to keep all of this multi-magnitudes of data flowing and properly stored and recorded. Steve?
Okay. So thank you for this opportunity to share with those in Russia and in Europe. I'm a tool maker, and I've been involved in Hollywood, as Dennis said, for over 30 years. My talk yesterday was about an integrated NAS storage system that's at Sony Picture Studios, and it's there to support Sony's 4K workflow with their new cameras, the F65 and F55 cameras. And their cameras can record up to 120 frames a second and generating a write speed of 5.5 gigabits a second, and then they have to manipulate that data so it's usable, which is called demosaicing. That data then goes from a 10 meg file to a 55 meg file, and that's per frame, so the 24 or 120 frames per second. That's a lot of data. That data then needs to be manipulated and shared between different workstations. So we developed a platform agnostic NAS, and that enabled Linux, PC, and Mac workstations to access the data. It also enabled various Sony card readers and transfer appliances to be able to download content to a common storage system. And it's used 1 day a week by Sony to train Hollywood community on the use of their technology. And the remaining 3 days a week, it's a lab for us in Hollywood to work together and manipulate data and work out ways to streamline workflow.
Steve, where do you see this going in the future in terms of if you take a crystal ball and look ahead 5 years with the increasing number of movies and video demand that has to be stored, retrieved, played back, along with the TV industry, which is exploding? What do you see some of the challenges and some of the solutions to today's problems?
Well, the biggest challenge is the size of files. So for a typical movie that's shooting on the F65, they might shoot 2 or 3 terabytes a day. That is just the original raw content. Then it's transcoded into different formats for viewing, different formats for editing, different formats for review and approval. It's then manipulated with color correction and visual effects, and so there's so many iterations that a typical movie may end up having 200 terabytes, 300 terabytes. The challenge that we have in Hollywood is that we know how to store film that lasts 100 years. We don't know how to store those bits, whether they're on USB drives or eSATA or SATs or even SSD. How is that going to be accessed 20, 30 years from now? The Academy has done a research paper called The Digital Dilemma, and they have looked at this challenge. The challenge is even more dramatic when you talk about those films that were made 5 years ago when they were making them on videotape. So, for instance, Collateral, the Michael Mann movie, has thousands and thousands of videotapes. We know a videotape can't last 20 years on a shelf. So that all has to be digitized. There's no money in the budget of an archive to do that yet. There's money in budgets to pay for a salt mine in Kansas to archive a movie, but there's not that to physically manipulate that data. So the challenge in Hollywood now is since we're archiving movies on data, is that we may lose the original negative, the original camera elements, and we'll only have those elements which now they are transferring back to film. Once they make a film release print or even a digital release print, they make YCM separation masters on film even though they post-produced it digitally. So our biggest challenge is how to preserve the history of what we're doing from now on, and certainly there's ways that we can repurpose and distribute it once it's digital, but we want to be able to be able to reuse it in the future, but it's just going to be very costly.
And Steve, to put things in perspective, and I've heard some numbers, but you have the actual numbers. For a typical, say, 2-hour movie, it might take multi-days to film, and the number of hours of actual film for that 2 hours is a phenomenal number. And could you tell us what those parameters are?
Sure. So I mentioned just if you're shooting on the F-65, that could be 2 terabytes a day of raw content. A typical movie might shoot for 60 days, so we're talking about that as raw content.
2 terabytes times 60 days
for
a 2-hour...
For a 2-hour movie. So there might be a 20 to 1, a 30 to 1, a 100 to 1 shooting ratio depending upon what they're shooting. But again, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because movies are regionalized, localized. They are repurposed for many different formats. So that original digital file, which is called it's a mezzanine file, but the original master is then repurposed for cinema, for television, for the web, for phones, and it's repurposed in framing, it's repurposed potentially in color bit depth, it's repurposed in soundtracks, and so there are many, many versions of it. Fox is being very proactive and developing a way to store all the common elements and then also store just those elements which are different, rather than have 30 different versions of the movie when 80% of the movie is the same. So that's a challenge. We have hundreds and hundreds of terabytes, as I've said before, per movie.
Another ingredient, and I don't know the answer to this myself, but through the world, you mentioned that you were dealing with Japan, you're dealing with the UK, you're dealing with the U.S. Aren't the formats different in some of those venues, and do you have to somehow commonize those formats for different viewing?
Well, originally cinema was universal, 24 frames a second, celluloid played anywhere in the world. That has changed with digital cinema now, because it's not only 24, some cinemas are 25 frames per second. But digital cinema has more universalized the distribution. So there are multiple formats that you're making. A very unusual release was Avatar. That's a 3D movie, and the challenge of 3D is that we're not really projecting it at the appropriate light levels in the regional cinemas. So that Jim Cameron, who is a perfectionist, researched all the major theaters in the world and customized the deliverable for that theater based on the projectors, the light level, so that the common experience would be the same throughout the world. So for that movie, there were 35 masters for the United States and 285 masters for the rest of the world. So he couldn't do every theater, but he did a lot of the major theaters where he knew his movie was playing. So it's a plethora of versions still. It's really challenging.
So the producer really does, in some ways, design the formats and the final product in terms of how the viewer sees the product on the presentation.
Jim Cameron is a very unique producer, a director, and he is the only one who has done that to date. No one else has done that. Everybody else makes a movie, puts it out there, and the way it's seen is the way it's seen. It's a challenge. They would like to have consistency, and that's part of what the Digital Cinema Initiative is to have commonalities and standards. And SMPTE is another group that's trying to put standards as to white point and illumination, because even if they have the right illumination, if the white point is not the same white, then all the colors are going to be different. It's a different experience.
Well, Steven, thank you very much. I think that's been very entertaining for me. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the audience will learn quite a bit from this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.